My wife got pregnant by another man. She tried to pass his child as mine. Her parents said, "It doesn't matter who the father is. What matters is who raises the child." For 10 years, I woke up beside the same woman and thought that loyalty was a quiet thing you proved every day. We were not perfect, but we were steady, and we had one dream we kept circling like a porch light in summer, and that was a child. We talked about names on long drives and laughed at how serious we sounded, and then we would get home and choose comfort over courage and tell ourselves we had time. Every year we said the same words soon. Every year I believed them. Then one ordinary evening, she stood in the kitchen holding a test in her hand like it was fragile glass, and she said, "I am pregnant." My chest filled so fast I almost could not breathe. I remember how my hands shook when I hugged her, and how I whispered thank you like someone had finally opened a door I thought was locked. But when I pulled back to look at her face, I felt the first cold drop of doubt. She was not glowing, and she was not laughing, and she did not cling to me like this was our miracle. Her eyes looked past my shoulder like she was measuring the room for exits. I told myself pregnancy was heavy news, and everyone reacts differently. I told myself to be strong for both of us. I made tea and started talking about doctor visits and vitamins and a nursery. She nodded, but her nods were late like her mind was somewhere else. That night she turned away from me in bed and said she was tired. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the silence between us. In the morning, I brought home flowers and she thanked me the way you thank a neighbor for holding a door. I tried to ignore the small things that did not fit. The way she guarded her phone. The way she checked the door twice before leaving. The way she started wearing perfume even when she said she was only going to her parents'. I told myself I was becoming paranoid because I wanted this baby so badly. I wanted to be the kind of man who believes his wife when she tells him something beautiful. Still, I started to watch without showing it. I started to memorize her patterns the way you memorize weather before a storm. She began taking calls on the balcony and lowering her voice. When I stepped closer, she would end the call and smile too wide. When I asked who it was, she would say, "Just my mom, just my friend, just work." There was always a just, like she was trying to make the lie smaller. I did not confront her, not yet. I had learned in life that you do not swing a hammer at a wall until you know what is behind it. I wanted the truth, not a fight. A week later, she told me she needed space because her hormones made her sensitive. She said I was hovering. She said I was making her anxious. I apologized even though I did not understand what I had done wrong. I started sleeping on the edge of the bed like I was a guest in my own home. The only time she seemed calm was when she was looking at her phone. Her thumbs moved fast, then she would pause and bite her lip, and for a second her face would soften in a way I had not seen in months. That softness was not for me. I hated myself for noticing that. One afternoon she left in a hurry after saying she had a prenatal appointment. She forgot her phone on the counter. I noticed it because it buzzed twice in a row like someone was impatient. I stood there staring at it like it was a live wire. I told myself, do not touch it. I told myself trust is a choice. Then it buzzed again, and the screen lit up with a name I did not recognize. The message preview showed one word, mine. My stomach turned. I wish I could say I walked away. I did not. My hand moved before my pride could stop it. I picked up the phone, and my thumb hovered, and I told myself I am protecting my family. I am protecting my future child. I unlocked it because I knew her code, and that fact suddenly felt like a joke. The conversation opened, and my eyes started reading before my heart could prepare. I saw dates and late-night times and a pattern of words that was too familiar. I saw her telling him she missed him. I saw him asking if the husband suspects. I saw her answering, "Not really, he trusts me." I saw a line that made the room tilt. She wrote, "I am pregnant, and I do not know what to do." He wrote, "You said he will believe it is his." She wrote, "He has wanted a baby for years, and he will not question it." He wrote, "You have to be careful with timing and doctors." She wrote, "I will handle it." Then the last message came in while I was staring. It said, "Do you still love me, or are you just scared?" Her reply was already typed like she had been thinking about it all day. She wrote, "I am scared, but I also do not want to lose you." My hands went cold and my face went hot, and I felt like I was standing outside my own life looking through a window. 10 years collapsed into a few glowing lines on a screen. I set the phone down exactly where I found it, like placing a weapon back in a drawer. My first thought was that I could not breathe. My second thought was that I needed to breathe very calmly, because anger makes men stupid, and I refused to be stupid. I walked to the sink and ran water and watched it spill over my hands until they stopped shaking. I looked at the reflection in the kitchen window, and I did not recognize the man looking back. He looked older and too quiet. I knew then that the baby I had already started loving might not be mine. I knew then that the woman I protected might have been planning to use my love like a shield. I heard the front door open an hour later, and her footsteps were light and rushed like she was trying to keep time from catching her. She came into the kitchen and smiled when she saw the flowers still in the vase. She said, "You are home early." I said I took time off. She asked why, and I said I wanted to be with you. She looked relieved for a second, and that relief cut deeper than any insult. Then her phone buzzed again, and she reached for it too quickly. I watched her eyes flick down and her fingers tighten. I said softly, "Who is that?" She laughed once like it was nothing and said, "Just my mom." I nodded like I believed her. I watched her walk away with the phone held close to her chest, and I made a decision that felt like metal settling into place. I would not shout. I would not beg. I would not threaten. I would let her believe her plan was working until I had every piece I needed. Because if she could lie about a child, then she could lie about everything else. And I was done being the man who smiles while someone quietly steals his life. That night, I barely slept. I lay there listening to her breathing and thinking about how easy it was for a person to share a bed with you while hiding another world inside their phone. In the dark, every small sound felt loud. Her turning over, the soft tap of a notification she tried to silence under the blanket, the creak of the floor when she went to the bathroom and stayed gone a minute too long. By morning, my eyes burned, but my mind was clear. I told myself the truth is a knife, and you either hold it with control or you cut yourself. I got up and made breakfast like I always did. Eggs, toast, tea. I did it slowly and on purpose, because routine was the only thing in that house that did not lie. She came in wearing my old hoodie, and she looked almost like the woman I married. Almost. She sat down and stared at the plate without appetite. I asked how she felt, and she said tired. I said we will get through it. She nodded again with that late nod. That was when I understood she had been practicing her role for a while, and I was only now reading the script after she left. For work, I sat at the table and wrote 3 sentences on a piece of paper. I saw the messages. The baby may not be mine. I am done being fooled. I stared at those sentences until they stopped feeling unreal. Then I folded the paper and put it in my wallet. Not because I needed to remember, but because I needed to commit. I called a lawyer I had met years ago through a friend. I kept my voice calm and asked for a consultation. When he asked what it was about, I said divorce and paternity. There was a short pause on the line like he had heard those words too many times. He gave me a time for that afternoon. I drove there with my hands steady on the wheel and my chest hollow. The office was quiet and smelled like paper and coffee. The lawyer listened without interrupting while I explained the pregnancy, the phone, the messages. He asked if I had taken screenshots. I told him no. I had not wanted to set off alarms. He said you will need evidence, and you will need to move carefully. He told me the law in plain language. He told me to document everything. He told me to avoid screaming fights and avoid threats. And avoid anything she could twist into a story where she was the victim. He said something that stayed with me. He said you do not win by being louder. You win by being consistent. I left with a plan that felt cold but solid. Step 1 was to secure proof of the affair. Step 2 was to protect my finances. Step 3 was to prepare for a paternity test at the right time. Step 4 was to keep my dignity. Back home, I opened a new email account and stored notes there, dates, times, anything that might matter later. I checked our shared accounts and I saw small transfers that never used to happen. Nothing huge, but enough to make my jaw tighten. I made copies of bank statements. I changed passwords to my private accounts. I did not take money from her. I did not hide anything. I simply separated what was mine and what was shared. If she wanted a war, she would not be able to claim I started it. Over the next days, I watched her more closely. She began leaving earlier and returning later. She claimed she had cravings and needed to walk. She claimed she was nauseous and needed fresh air. She claimed she was visiting her mother more often. Her mother confirmed it every time I asked, but her mother sounded rehearsed too, like 2 women sharing the same script. One evening, my wife came home and went straight to the shower. She left her phone on the dresser. It buzzed and buzzed, and I could see the screen light through the bathroom door. My heart beat hard, but I kept my breathing slow. I walked to the dresser and picked it up. My thumb moved faster than my guilt. I opened the conversation and scrolled. I saw more than I wanted: plans, jokes, memories, messages about me like I was furniture. There was a photo too, not explicit but intimate enough to prove what words could deny. She wrote he still thinks the baby is his. He wrote you are good at acting. She wrote I hate myself, but I need him to stay calm until the divorce is final. He wrote he will raise my kid and never. No. I stared at that line until my vision blurred. Not because it hurt, but because it confirmed something darker. This was not a mistake. This was a strategy. I took screenshots then, every page, every line that mattered. I sent them to my new email. I deleted the sent evidence from her phone and cleared the trash the way the lawyer told me. Then I put the phone back exactly as it was. When she came out of the shower with wet hair and soft eyes, she asked if everything was okay. I looked at her and saw how easily she could perform concern. I said everything is fine. She smiled like she had won something. That smile made my decision easier. A few days later, she announced we should tell our families. She wanted a dinner. She wanted celebration photos. She wanted to post online. I told her we should wait until the next appointment. I said I did not want to jinx anything. She did not like that. Her eyes narrowed for half a second, then she forced a smile and said, "You are right." That was another moment that taught me the truth. Her happiness was not about the baby. It was about control. That weekend her parents invited us over. I went because I needed to see what they knew. Her father opened the door and hugged me hard like he was trying to hold me in place. Her mother stared at my face like she was checking for cracks. Over dinner they talked about the baby, as if it was already a fact sealed in stone. Her mother said, "You will be a wonderful father," and my wife squeezed my hand under the table like a warning. I smiled and said, "I will do what is right." Her father laughed and said, "That is why we like you. You are stable." Her mother added quietly, "The main thing is who will raise the child, not who the father is." She said it like it was a wise proverb. I looked at her and realized she already knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough. I asked gently, "What do you mean?" She waved her hand and said, "I just mean a child needs a good home. Blood is not everything." My wife stared at her plate. Her father cleared his throat and changed the subject. In that moment, I felt a calm so sharp it almost felt like relief, because now I knew what I was facing, not just betrayal, but a family willing to dress it up as morality. On the drive home, my wife was quiet. Then she said, "My mom talks too much." I said, "She says what she believes." She snapped and said, "She is just trying to protect me." I kept my voice even and said, "From what? From consequences?" She turned and looked at me fast, her eyes wide. For a second I thought she suspected I knew everything. Then she laughed nervously and said, "You worry too much." I nodded and said, "Maybe I do." That night she tried to be close to me, not in a romantic way, but in a desperate way. She put her hand on my chest and said, "I am scared." I said, "I know." She whispered, "Promise me you will not leave me." I stayed still and said, "We will talk soon." She asked when, and I said, "When the time is right." She fell asleep holding my arm like a child holds a railing. I stared into the dark and thought about that message. He will raise my kid and never know. I promised myself two things. I would not raise a lie, and I would not let anyone shame me for refusing to live inside it. The next morning I scheduled another meeting with my lawyer, and I told myself the calm part was over. Soon I would speak, and when I did, every word would land exactly where it needed to land. I chose the day carefully, not because I wanted drama, but because timing matters when truth is involved. She had just come back from another appointment and was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone with a small smile that did not reach her eyes. I sat across from her and waited until she noticed the silence. She asked what was wrong, and I said, "We need to talk." Her shoulders tightened instantly, and I saw fear flash before she covered it with concern. She said, "Is everything okay with the baby?" I said, "This is not about the baby." That was when she started crying before I even said another word. Loud sobs that came too fast, like she had been waiting for a cue. I stayed calm and handed her a glass of water and told her to breathe. When she looked up at me with wet eyes, I said, "I saw the messages." The room went still. Her crying stopped like a switch had been flipped. She stared at me and asked, "What messages?" I said, "The ones with him. About the pregnancy. About me." Her face drained of color and she started shaking. She tried to speak and no sound came out. Then the tears returned, but these were different. These were desperate. She fell to her knees in front of me and grabbed my hands and said, "Please forgive me. Please do not do this. It was a mistake. I love you." I listened without pulling away and without leaning in. When she finished, I said quietly, "This was not a mistake. This was a plan." She shook her head hard and said, "No, I was confused and scared, and it just happened." I said, "You wrote he will raise my kid and never know." She froze again. I could see the exact moment she realized how much I knew. She said, "I did not mean it like that." I said, "Then how did you mean it?" She could not answer. She just cried and begged and said, "We can fix this, and we can be a family, and you can still be the father." I took my hands back gently and said, "I respect myself too much to live inside a lie." She said, "Blood does not matter, and her parents agree." I said, "My dignity matters, and I agree with myself." I told her I would be filing for divorce. I said if she wanted it to be calm and fair, she would cooperate and not interfere. She grabbed my arm and said, "You are destroying everything." I said, "You destroyed it when you decided I was useful instead of honest." She asked, "What about the child?" I said, "The child deserves truth from the beginning, even if it hurts." She asked if I hated her. I said, "No, but I do not trust you, and love without trust is just habit." She sat back on the floor like something inside her had collapsed. She asked if there was someone else. I said, "No, there is just me finally choosing myself." The next days moved quickly. Papers were filed. Accounts were separated. I moved into the spare room while she packed boxes and made phone calls. With red eyes, her parents called me and asked to meet. I agreed because I wanted to hear them say it out loud. We sat at their table and her mother spoke first. She said, "You are a good man, but you are being selfish." She said the child needs stability. I said stability built on deception teaches a child the wrong lessons. Her father said you could still be a father figure. I said I will not play a role in someone else's performance. Her mother said, "You are throwing away 10 years. I said I am saving the rest of my life. They accused me of being cold and unforgiving. I said forgiveness does not mean obedience. When I left that house, I felt lighter than I had in months. The divorce moved forward without screaming because I refused to engage. She tried one last time by sending long messages at night saying she would do anything. I replied once and said please communicate through lawyers. After that I blocked her number. The day the divorce was finalized, I signed my name slowly and felt something settle inside me. I walked out into the sunlight and realized I was not angry anymore. I was free. Weeks later, I met someone new by accident in a place where I was not looking for anything. She did not know my story, and she did not need to. She laughed easily and spoke honestly, and when she looked at me, there was no calculation in her eyes. Over time, I told her everything, and she listened without judging and said you did the right thing. That was the moment I knew my life was no longer defined by what I lost, but by what I refused to accept. And that choice gave me peace I had not felt in years. After the divorce, people expected my life to slow down or fall apart, but the opposite happened quietly and without celebration. I returned to routines I had abandoned without noticing. Morning walks, cooking real meals, sleeping without waiting for a phone to buzz. The silence in my apartment felt honest, and that mattered more than comfort. My lawyer called a few weeks later and said the paternity issue had been resolved officially. The test confirmed what I already knew. The child was not mine. Hearing it out loud still hit differently. Not like pain, but like a final lock clicking shut. There was no doubt left to argue with. No imaginary future to mourn. I thanked him and ended the call and sat by the window watching people pass below, each of them carrying stories I would never know. I wondered how many of them were living inside compromises they called love. Word traveled fast through friends and family. Some reached out with support. Some stayed silent because silence is easier than choosing sides. A few told me I should have stayed and tried harder. I listened and did not argue. Everyone speaks from the limits of their own courage. My ex tried once more through an email sent late at night. She wrote that she was scared and alone and that motherhood was heavier than she expected. She wrote that maybe we could talk like adults and find peace. I read it twice and felt no urge to reply. Peace does not always require conversation. Sometimes it requires distance. I deleted the message and went to bed. The woman I had started seeing did not rush me and did not ask me to heal faster than I could. We talked about simple things at first: work, music, places we wanted to see. She never asked for promises, and that made trust easier. One evening, she asked what I learned from everything that happened. I thought for a long time before answering. I said I learned that love without respect becomes a transaction, and I refuse to bargain with my own worth. She nodded like she understood exactly what that meant. Months passed, and my life felt steady again. Not exciting in a dramatic way, but grounded and real. I stopped replaying old conversations in my head. I stopped wondering what I could have done differently. Because the truth was simple. I did nothing wrong by believing. I only corrected my mistake when belief was used against me. One afternoon, I ran into my former mother-in-law at a store. She looked older and tired. She asked how I was doing. I said I am well. She hesitated, then said the child is healthy. I said I am glad to hear that. She looked at me like she wanted to say more, but could not find the words. I wished her well and walked away. I did not feel anger or victory, just closure. That was when I realized I had truly moved on. Not when the papers were signed or the test was done, but when her life no longer felt connected to my identity. I was no longer the man who was almost a father or almost fooled. I was simply myself. Again, later that year, I stood in a quiet park holding the hand of a woman who chose honesty even when it was uncomfortable. She asked me if I ever wanted children. I said yes, but only when the truth is the foundation, not the reward. She smiled and said that sounds like a good rule. In that moment, I understood that happiness does not come from avoiding pain, but from refusing to live inside lies. And every step I took after that was lighter because it was real. I thought the story had ended there, but life has a way of testing whether your lessons actually stayed with you. One morning, months later, I received a message from a number I did not recognize. It was short and careful. It said, "I know you do not want contact, but I need to say something important." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. I wrote, "Please be clear and brief." The reply came almost immediately. She said the man she had the affair with had disappeared. She said he denied responsibility and refused to help. She said her parents were pressuring her and blaming her for everything. She said she finally understood what it felt like to stand alone. I read the words without emotion, not because I lacked empathy, but because empathy does not require sacrifice. She asked if we could meet just once to talk. I said no. She asked why, and I answered honestly, because talking will not change the past and will only blur the clarity we both need. She wrote that she was afraid and overwhelmed. I replied, "That fear is a teacher, but only if you listen to it early." After that, the messages stopped. I told my girlfriend about it that evening. I did not hide anything, and I did not dramatize it. She listened and asked how I felt. I said I felt confirmed that walking away was the right choice even when it was hard. She squeezed my hand and said, "I am glad you did not confuse kindness with self-betrayal." Those words stayed with me. Over time, I noticed how different my reactions had become. I no longer felt the urge to fix situations that were not mine to fix. I no longer felt responsible for other people's choices. That freedom was quiet but powerful. One day, while cleaning old files, I found a photo from years ago of me and my ex smiling on a beach. For a moment, I studied my own face in that picture. I looked hopeful and open and unaware. I did not feel shame for that man. I felt respect. Because he loved fully and trusted honestly, and those are not weaknesses, I deleted the photo and closed the folder. That chapter no longer needed artifacts. My life continued forward without noise. Work improved. Friendships deepened. Trust returned slowly and naturally. Not because I forced it, but because I allowed it. The suspense I once lived with every day was gone, replaced by a calm certainty that I could survive truth no matter how sharp it was. And that certainty became the foundation of everything that followed. I no longer wondered what might have been. I only focused on what was real, and that reality was finally mine. With time, I noticed something unexpected happening inside me. The absence of chaos created space for reflection. I started paying attention to how my decisions felt instead of how they looked. There was no audience anymore, and that changed everything. I stopped explaining myself and started listening to myself. That was when I realized how much of my old life had been built around compromise disguised as patience. I had learned to wait and tolerate and hope instead of asking direct questions. Now I asked them immediately, not with suspicion but with clarity. The woman I was with noticed the change too. She once said, "You are very calm, but not passive." I understood that as a compliment. Calm does not mean weak and silence does not mean consent. One evening we talked about the future in a simple way without pressure. She asked where I saw myself in a few years. I said somewhere honest, somewhere I do not have to check phones or read between lines. She said that sounded like a place she wanted to be too. There was no promise made that night. And that was exactly why it felt real. Around the same time, I heard through mutual acquaintances that my ex was struggling. Not dramatically and not tragically, but visibly. The weight of her choices had become permanent instead of emotional. I felt no satisfaction hearing that. Only distance. Consequences are not revenge, they are alignment. Everyone eventually stands where their decisions place them. I thought about the child sometimes, not with longing, but with a quiet wish that they would grow up surrounded by truth instead of justification. I hoped someone would teach them that love does not require manipulation and family does not excuse betrayal. Those thoughts passed without bitterness. They were not anchors anymore. One weekend I visited my parents and sat in the same kitchen where I had once told them about the pregnancy with excitement in my voice. My mother looked at me and said, "You seem different." I said, "I am lighter." She smiled and said, "That suits you." That was when I realized healing does not always look like happiness. Sometimes it looks like steadiness, like no longer needing to prove anything. As I drove home that night, I felt something close to gratitude, not for the pain, but for the clarity it forced on me. Because some lessons only arrive when illusion collapses completely. I did not wish the experience on anyone, but I no longer wished it away either. It had shaped the man I was becoming. Someone who values truth over comfort and self-respect over familiarity. Someone who understands that love offered under pressure is not love at all. As weeks turned into months, my relationship grew naturally, built on small, consistent actions instead of promises. There was no suspense in my days anymore, and I understood why. Suspense only exists when you wait for something to break. Now I lived in a way that did not require waiting. And that might have been the greatest change of all. The last thing that changed was not something dramatic, but something quiet and permanent. I stopped defining myself by what I survived. The story that once felt heavy and sharp slowly became just a reference point, not a wound. I could think about it without tension and speak about it without heat. That was how I knew it no longer owned me. One evening, my partner and I sat together watching the city lights come on one by one. She asked if I ever regretted how firm I had been. I thought carefully before answering. I said no, because being firm saved me from becoming someone I would not respect. She nodded and said, "That is the kind of man I trust." That word trust landed deeper than any apology ever could. In that moment, I understood the full circle of it all. Betrayal had not ended my ability to trust. It had refined it. I trusted slower but stronger. I trusted actions, not words. I trusted consistency, not emotion. And most importantly, I trusted myself. Time continued forward without looking back. I built a life that did not require constant vigilance. A life where questions were answered directly and silence was not used as a weapon. The past became quiet not because it was forgiven, but because it was understood. One afternoon, I received a notification that my divorce records were officially closed and archived. I smiled at the finality of it. Some endings do not need ceremony. They only need acceptance. I walked outside and felt the air and thought about how close I had come to living a life based on someone else's fear. and how far away that version of me now felt. I did not win anything in a traditional sense. I did not get revenge or public validation. What I gained was something far more valuable, the certainty that I will never trade my self-respect for comfort again. If there is a lesson in my story, it is simple. Love built on lies collapses under its own weight, and truth does not need shouting to be powerful. I moved forward without bitterness and without regret, carrying only what was real, and that was more than enough.